The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the general store in Opal, Wyoming, and Theresa Owens stepped down into the dusty street with nothing but a worn leather satchel and a heart heavy with grief. The autumn wind of 1878 cut through her thin traveling dress, and she pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she surveyed the small mountain town that would be her temporary refuge. She had traveled 3 weeks from St. Louis, where the fever had taken her mother, father, and younger brother within the span of 10 brutal days, leaving her completely alone in the world at 22 years old. The town nestled against the foothills of the Wind River Range, its buildings constructed of rough-hewn timber and weathered boards that spoke of harsh winters and the resilience required to survive them. Smoke curled from chimneys, and the sound of a hammer striking an anvil rang out from the blacksmith shop. Theresa had come here because her mother's cousin had once mentioned living in this territory, though she had no idea if the woman still resided here, or even if she still drew breath. It was a desperate gamble, but she had nowhere else to go and precious little money left after paying for her family's burials and her passage west. She made her way to the general store, her boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. Inside, the proprietor looked up from where he was stacking cans of beans on a shelf. He was a round man with a balding head and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Help you, miss?" he asked, wiping his hands on his apron. "I am looking for a Mrs. Helen Patterson," Theresa said, her voice steady despite the anxiety that twisted in her stomach. "I was told she lived in this area." The proprietor's expression shifted to one of sympathy. "Helen Patterson passed on 2 winters ago, I am afraid. Pneumonia took her. Were you kin?" The floor seemed to tilt beneath Theresa's feet, and she gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. Her last hope, gone before she had even arrived. "She was my mother's cousin," she managed to say. "I had hoped to stay with her for a time." "You have come a long way for nothing, then," the proprietor said gently. "Do you have other family in the territory?" Theresa shook her head slowly, feeling the weight of her solitude pressing down on her like a physical force. "No, I have no one." The proprietor scratched his chin thoughtfully. "There is a boarding house run by Mrs. Kelly at the end of the main street. She might have a room, though work is scarce for women in these parts. Most make their living taking in laundry or cooking for the miners and trappers." Theresa thanked him and stepped back out into the cold afternoon. The sun was already beginning its descent toward the mountains, and long shadows stretched across the street. She found the boarding house easily enough, a 2-story structure with a covered porch and lace curtains in the windows. Mrs. Kelly was a stern-faced woman in her 50s who looked Theresa up and down with sharp eyes before quoting a price that would drain what little money Theresa had left within 2 weeks. "I will need to find work quickly," Theresa said quietly. "Can you cook?" Mrs. Kelly asked. "Yes, and I can sew, clean, and keep accounts. I will ask around, but do not expect miracles. This is a hard place for a woman alone." Mrs. Kelly's tone was not unkind, merely practical. "Supper is at 6, do not be late." Theresa climbed the narrow stairs to the small room she had been assigned. It contained a bed, a washstand, and a single chair beneath a small window that looked out over the mountains. She sank onto the bed and allowed herself a moment of despair, pressing her hands to her face as tears threatened to spill over. Everything familiar was gone. Everyone she had loved was buried in Missouri soil, and she sat alone in a strange town in the Wyoming territory with winter approaching and no prospects for survival. She did not allow herself to cry. Tears would not feed her or put a roof over her head. Instead, she unpacked her few belongings, washed her face in the cold water from the pitcher, and went downstairs for supper. The dining room held 4 other boarders, all men. They looked at her with varying degrees of curiosity and speculation as she took a seat at the long table. Mrs. Kelly served a simple meal of stew and bread, and Theresa ate in silence while the men discussed mining claims, timber contracts, and the early snow that had already fallen in the high country. The next morning, Theresa set about finding work. She visited the dressmaker's shop, the hotel, the restaurant, and every business that might have need of help. Everywhere she went, she received the same answer. There was no work available, or they could not afford to hire anyone, or they already had someone. By noon, her feet ached and discouragement sat like a stone in her chest. She was walking past the livery stable when she heard raised voices. A man in a fine suit was arguing with the stable owner, his face red with anger. "I paid good money for that horse, and now you tell me it has gone lame." The suited man shouted. "I told you not to run it so hard on rocky ground," the stable owner shot back. "Animal needs rest and care, not to be ridden into the ground." Theresa hurried past, not wanting to be caught in the middle of someone else's dispute. She continued to the edge of town, where a few scattered cabins gave way to open country. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already white with snow. The wilderness stretched endlessly, beautiful and terrifying in its vastness. She was about to turn back when she noticed a figure approaching from the direction of the mountains. Even from a distance, she could tell he was different from the townspeople she had encountered. He walked with a long, easy stride, leading a pack horse loaded with bundles of furs. He wore buckskin clothing and a wide-brimmed hat, and a rifle was slung across his back. As he drew closer, she could see he was a young man, perhaps in his late 20s, with dark hair that brushed his shoulders and a beard that could not quite hide a strong jawline. He noticed her watching and touched the brim of his hat in greeting as he passed. His eyes were a startling blue-green, like mountain water, and they held an intelligence and wariness that spoke of long years spent in wild places. Theresa returned to the boarding house and spent the afternoon mending a tear in her other dress and trying not to think about how quickly her money was disappearing. At supper, Mrs. Kelly mentioned that she might be able to use help with the cooking and cleaning in exchange for reduced room and board, but it would not be enough to live on. "You might try asking Lucas Dalton if he needs help at his trading post," one of the boarders suggested. "He sometimes takes on help during the busy season." "Lucas Dalton does not have a trading post," another boarder corrected. "He is a mountain man. Lives up in the high country most of the year, only comes to town to trade his furs and stock up on supplies." "That was him I saw coming in today then," the first boarder said. "Probably staying at his cabin on the edge of town for a few days." Theresa stored the information away, though she could not imagine what use a mountain man would have for a woman's help. Still, she was desperate enough to consider any possibility. The following day was Sunday, and most of the town turned out for services at the small church. Theresa attended, partly from habit and partly in hopes of making connections that might lead to employment. The minister was an earnest young man who preached about faith in times of trial, and Theresa tried to take comfort from his words even as doubt gnawed at her. After the service, she introduced herself to several of the town's women, who received her with polite interest but little warmth. She was an outsider, and in a place like Opal that mattered. They asked about her family, and when she explained that she had lost them all to fever, their expressions softened somewhat. "You poor dear," one woman said, though her sympathy seemed more automatic than genuine. "It must be dreadful to be so alone." "I am managing," Theresa replied, lifting her chin slightly. She would not be pitied. That afternoon, desperate for something to occupy her mind, she took a walk along the creek that ran through town. The aspens were turning gold, and the water ran clear and cold over smooth stones. She was watching a bird dart among the branches when she heard a sound that made her freeze. A low, threatening growl. She turned slowly and found herself facing a massive dog, or what she thought was a dog until she looked closer and realized it was a wolf. Its hackles were raised, and its lips pulled back from white teeth. Terror locked her muscles, and she could not move, could not even breathe. "Easy," a deep voice said from behind her. "Do not run, just stay very still." The mountain man she had seen the day before appeared at her side, moving with surprising quiet for such a large man. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, hard build of someone who lived by physical labor. He kept his voice low and calm as he addressed the wolf. "Go on now, get out of here." The wolf's ears flattened, but it did not retreat. The man took a step forward, making himself larger, and clapped his hands once with a sharp sound that echoed off the rocks. The wolf finally turned and loped away into the trees, disappearing like smoke. Theresa found her voice. "Thank you. I thought I was about to be attacked." "She was not going to attack," the man said, turning to look at her with those remarkable eyes. "She was warning you away from her den. There are pups nearby, probably. Still, you were right to be frightened. Wild things are unpredictable, and a mother protecting her young is especially dangerous." "I did not realize there were wolves so close to town." "They are all around, though they usually avoid people. You must be the woman who came in on the stagecoach a few days ago, the one looking for Helen Patterson." "News travels quickly in a small town," Theresa said. "That it does." He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "I was sorry to hear about your family. Fever is a cruel way to lose people. You know about that as well. I may live in the mountains, but I hear things when I come to town." He paused, then extended his hand. "Lucas Dalton." She took his hand, feeling the calluses and the strength in his grip. "Theresa Owens. You should head back to town, Miss Owens. The mountains are no place for someone unfamiliar with them, and the sun will be down soon." "I was just walking by the creek." "This creek runs all the way up into the high country. It is easy to follow it farther than you intend and lose track of where you are." His tone was not condescending, just matter of fact. The wilderness does not forgive mistakes. Theresa bristled slightly at being told what to do, but she could not deny the wisdom of his words. "I will head back now. Thank you again for your help with the wolf." He touched his hat brim in the same gesture he had used when they first saw each other, and she turned to walk back toward town. She could feel his eyes on her back for a moment before she heard his footsteps heading in a different direction. That evening at supper, Mrs. Kelly announced that she would indeed hire Theresa to help with the cooking and cleaning, which would reduce her room and board by half. It was something, though not nearly enough. Theresa thanked her and tried to feel grateful, but the weight of her precarious situation pressed down on her throughout the meal. The next morning, she rose early to help Mrs. Kelly prepare breakfast for the boarders. The work was familiar and comforting in its routine: mixing biscuit dough, frying bacon, brewing coffee. She had helped her mother in the kitchen countless times, and her hands remembered the motions even as her heart ached with loss. After breakfast, she set about cleaning the rooms. She was scrubbing the floor of the hallway when Mrs. Kelly appeared at the top of the stairs. "There is someone here to see you," the older woman said, her expression curious. Theresa descended to find Lucas Dalton standing in the boarding house parlor, his hat in his hands. He looked out of place amid the feminine touches of lace doilies and china figurines, too large and too wild for the domesticated space. "Mr. Dalton," she said, surprised. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing wrong. I wanted to speak with you about a proposition." He glanced at Mrs. Kelly, who was hovering in the doorway with undisguised interest. "Perhaps we could talk outside." Theresa fetched her shawl and followed him out onto the porch. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine from the mountains. "I have been thinking about your situation," Lucas said without preamble. "You need work, and I need someone to help me with my cabin before winter sets in proper. The roof needs repairs. There is chinking that needs to be done between the logs, and I could use help preserving meat and preparing supplies. It is hard work, and the cabin is a half-day's ride from town, but I would pay fair wages and provide food and lodging while you work." Theresa stared at him, not sure she had heard correctly. "You want me to come to your cabin in the mountains? For a few weeks, yes. I would bring you back to town once the work is finished, or sooner if there is a problem. I know it is not conventional, but I thought you might need the money enough to consider it. Mr. Dalton, I barely know you, and surely you understand how it would look, an unmarried woman going off to live in a cabin with an unmarried man. I understand propriety, Miss Owens, but I also understand desperation. Mrs. Kelly tells me you have been to every business in town looking for work and found nothing. Winter comes early and hard in these mountains, and you do not strike me as someone who has the means to last until spring." His tone was blunt but not unkind. "I am offering honest work for honest pay. You can sleep in the loft and I will sleep downstairs. I will not touch you or bother you in any way. You have my word on that." Theresa wanted to refuse outright. The very idea was scandalous. But he was right about her desperation. The money she had left would barely last another week, and even with the reduced room and board, she would not earn enough to survive. If she could not find a way to support herself, she would have only grim choices remaining: throw herself on the mercy of the church, hope some man would marry her out of pity, or worse. "How much would you pay?" she asked quietly. $20 for 3 weeks of work, plus room and board. It was more money than she could earn in town in 2 months. "Why would you pay so much?" "Because the work is hard and you would be isolated. Not many women would be willing to do it. And because I saw how you handled yourself with that wolf. You were terrified, but you held still and did not panic. That kind of courage is valuable in the mountains." "I need to think about it." "Fair enough. I am leaving the day after tomorrow at first light. If you want to come, meet me at the livery stable. If you do not show, I will understand." He settled his hat back on his head and turned to leave, then paused. "For what it is worth, Miss Owens, I am not a danger to you. I have lived alone for a long time and I prefer it that way. I am not looking for anything more than a hard worker for a few weeks." After he left, Theresa went back inside to find Mrs. Kelly waiting with eager questions. Theresa explained the offer and the older woman's eyes widened. "You cannot seriously be considering it," Mrs. Kelly said. "Your reputation would be ruined." "What reputation?" "I have been in town less than a week and no one knows me. Besides, what good is a reputation if I starve?" The words came out more sharply than Theresa intended. "I apologize. I know you mean well." Mrs. Kelly's expression softened. "I understand you are in a difficult position, dear. But Lucas Dalton is a strange man. He has lived in those mountains for years, barely speaking to anyone. Some say he is running from something, or that he went a bit mad after his family died. His family died years ago before he came here. I do not know the details, but I heard he had a wife and child back east. They both died and he came west to get away from the memories." Mrs. Kelly shook her head. "He is not dangerous, I do not think, but he is not like other men. There is something hard about him, something closed off." Theresa spent the rest of the day torn between caution and need. That night, lying in her narrow bed, she thought about her parents, who had worked so hard to provide a good life for their children. She thought about her brother, who had been only 14 and full of dreams about the future. They were all gone now, taken so quickly that she still sometimes forgot and expected to see them when she turned around. She had no family. No one to turn to, no one to help her, no safety net to catch her if she fell. The loneliness of it was like a physical ache, a hollow place inside her chest that nothing could fill. But she was still alive, and she would do what she needed to do to stay that way, even if it meant taking a risk that respectable people would condemn. The next day passed in a blur of anxious preparation. She helped Mrs. Kelly with the work as usual, but her mind was elsewhere. That evening, she carefully packed her satchel and wrote a letter explaining her decision, which she left with Mrs. Kelly along with enough money to hold her room for when she returned. "If I do not come back," Theresa said, trying for a light tone, "you can have my other dress." "Do not talk like that," Mrs. Kelly scolded, though worry showed in her eyes. "Lucas Dalton may be strange, but he is not a murderer. You will be fine, I am sure of it." Theresa was not sure of anything, but she had made her choice. She barely slept that night, and when the first gray light of dawn crept through her window, she was already dressed and ready. She crept down the stairs and let herself out of the boarding house, walking through the empty streets to the livery stable. Lucas was already there, loading supplies onto his pack horse. He looked up when she approached, and something that might have been relief crossed his features. "I was not certain you would come," he said. "Neither was I." Theresa straightened her shoulders. "But I am here, and I will work hard for you. I have no doubt of that." He finished securing the load and turned to the other horse, a calm-looking mare with a gentle eye. "This is Bess. She is steady and sure-footed. Have you ridden before?" "Not much, but I can manage." He helped her mount, his hands firm but impersonal as he steadied her. Once she was settled in the saddle, he swung up onto his own horse with easy grace and took the lead rope of the pack horse. "Stay close and follow my lead," he instructed. "The trail is clear enough, but there are places where one wrong step could mean trouble." They left Opal behind as the sun rose over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The trail climbed steadily upward, winding through forests of pine and aspen. The air grew colder and thinner as they ascended, and Theresa was grateful for her shawl and the warmth of the horse beneath her. Lucas did not speak much as they rode, but he frequently looked back to make sure she was keeping up. Around midday, he called a halt near a stream where the horses could drink and rest. He pulled jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags and offered half to Theresa. "How much farther?" she asked, chewing the tough dried meat. "Another few hours. The cabin is in a valley below the peaks, good water, good hunting, and sheltered from the worst of the wind." He looked at her appraisingly. "How are you holding up?" "I am well enough." Her legs ached from the unfamiliar position in the saddle, but she was determined not to complain. "You will be sore tonight," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I have liniment that will help." They remounted and continued upward. The forest closed in around them, and occasionally Theresa heard sounds in the underbrush that made her nervous. Lucas seemed unconcerned, guiding his horse with easy confidence through the wilderness. Finally, as the afternoon shadows grew long, they emerged into a valley cradled between towering peaks. A creek ran through it, and beside the creek stood a sturdy log cabin with a stone chimney. There was a small corral for the horses and a shed for storage. It was remote and isolated, but beautiful in its wild simplicity. "Welcome to my home," Lucas said, dismounting. He helped her down from the horse, and Theresa took a moment to steady herself on shaky legs. Lucas began unloading the supplies, and she moved to help despite her fatigue. "You should rest," he said. "You have had a long day." So have you, and you still have work to do. I said I would work hard, and I meant it. Something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. Together, they unloaded the horses and carried the supplies inside. The cabin was larger than it had appeared from outside, with a main room that held a stone fireplace, a table, and a few chairs. A ladder led up to a loft space that ran the length of one wall. The cabin was clean and well maintained, with tools hung neatly on the walls and cooking implements arranged by the hearth. "The loft is yours," Lucas said, gesturing upward. "I have extra blankets and I will build up the fire before bed so you stay warm." Theresa climbed the ladder to find a space under the sloping roof with a pallet already made up. It was simple but clean, and a small window looked out over the valley. She could see the last rays of sunlight turning the mountain peaks orange and pink. When she climbed back down, Lucas had a fire going and was preparing a meal. He moved around the space with practiced efficiency, and soon the smell of cooking meat and potatoes filled the cabin. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the wind outside. Theresa was so tired she could barely keep her eyes open, but she forced herself to help clean up after the meal. "Go on up and rest," Lucas said finally. "We will start work in the morning." Theresa climbed to the loft and wrapped herself in the blankets. She could hear Lucas moving around below, the sound of the fire being banked, the creak of wood as he settled in for the night. She thought she would lie awake for hours, worried about the strangeness of her situation, but exhaustion pulled her under within minutes. She woke to the sound of Lucas building up the fire. Pale morning light filtered through the window, and she could see her breath misting in the cold air. She climbed down the ladder to find Lucas already heating water for coffee. "Morning," he said. "Breakfast is almost ready." After a meal of fried cornmeal mush and bacon, Lucas showed her the work that needed to be done. The roof had several places where the bark covering was damaged and needed to be replaced. The chinking between the logs had cracked in places and needed to be filled with fresh mud and moss to keep out the winter wind. There was wood to be split and stacked, meat to be smoked and dried, and vegetables from his small garden to be preserved. "I will work on the roof," Lucas said. "Can you start on mixing new chinking? I will show you how." He demonstrated how to mix mud, clay, and dried moss into the right consistency, then how to pack it firmly into the gaps between the logs. It was hard, messy work, and Theresa's hands were soon caked with mud, but she found satisfaction in seeing the gaps disappear, and the cabin become more solid and weatherproof. They worked through the morning, breaking only for a quick meal at noon. Lucas proved to be a patient teacher, showing her how to do each task and trusting her to do it right. He did not hover or criticize, and he did not treat her as if she were fragile or incapable. As the days passed, they fell into a rhythm. Each morning they rose at dawn, ate a simple breakfast, and worked until sunset. Lucas was true to his word about keeping his distance. He was polite but reserved, speaking only when necessary to explain a task or discuss practical matters. At night, they ate together in companionable silence, and then Theresa climbed to her loft while Lucas slept by the fire. The work was hard, harder than anything Theresa had done in her comfortable city life, but she found herself growing stronger. Her hands developed calluses, and her muscles stopped aching quite so badly. She learned to recognize the signs of changing weather, to identify the tracks of different animals in the dirt around the cabin, to move through the wilderness with more confidence. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Lucas began to open up. It started with small comments, observations about the wildlife or the mountains. Then one evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, he told her about a bear that had tried to break into his food stores the previous winter and the elaborate system of ropes and pulleys he had devised to keep his supplies safe. "Did it work?" Theresa asked. "It did, though the bear sat outside the cabin for 3 days, looking offended that I had outsmarted it." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I swear it looked right at me with these sad eyes, as if I had personally wronged it." Theresa laughed, and something shifted in the air between them. After that, conversation came more easily. Lucas told her about the mountains, about the rhythm of the seasons and the animals that lived there. He taught her to identify different bird calls and showed her which plants were safe to eat. One afternoon, as they were working on replacing a section of the roof, Theresa asked the question that had been on her mind for days. "Why do you live out here alone, Mrs.? Kelly said you came from back east." Lucas was quiet for a long moment, and Theresa thought he would not answer. Then he said, "I had a wife once, and a daughter. They both died of cholera 8 years ago. My wife, Sarah, she was 23. My daughter, Emma, was only 3. "I am so sorry," Theresa said softly. "After they died, I could not stay in Philadelphia. Everything reminded me of them. Every street corner, every shop. I sold everything and came west, kept going until I found a place that felt far enough away from the memories." He paused. "But you never really get far enough, do you? The memories follow wherever you go." "No," Theresa agreed. "They do. I lost my parents and my brother just 6 weeks ago. Sometimes I forget and I think I need to tell my mother something, or I wonder what my brother is doing. And then I remember, and it is like losing them all over again." They worked in silence for a while, but it was a different kind of silence now, one built on shared understanding rather than mere awkwardness. That evening, as Theresa was preparing supper, Lucas came in from checking on the horses and stopped in the doorway, watching her move around the cabin. She looked up and caught him staring. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "No. I was just thinking that it has been a long time since this place felt like a home instead of just a shelter." He cleared his throat, looking almost embarrassed. "You have a way of bringing warmth to a space." Theresa felt heat rise to her cheeks. "That is kind of you to say." Over the next week, something changed between them. The reserve that Lucas had maintained began to crumble, replaced by a growing ease in each other's company. He began to seek out her opinion on things, to share stories from his past, to smile more readily. And Theresa found herself looking forward to the evenings by the fire, to the sound of his voice, to the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he was amused. She also found herself noticing things about him that had nothing to do with conversation. The strength in his arms when he lifted heavy logs, the gentleness of his hands when he carved a new wooden spoon to replace one that had cracked, the way the firelight played across his features in the evening. One morning, Theresa woke to the sound of rain drumming on the roof. She climbed down from the loft to find Lucas already up, looking out the window at the gray sky. "This is good," he said. "We can test the roof repairs, make sure there are no leaks." They spent the day inside, working on smaller tasks. Lucas was carving wooden pegs to repair a chair, and Theresa was mending a tear in one of his shirts. The intimacy of the domestic scene was not lost on either of them. "I have no family," Theresa said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. The words surprised her, coming out unbidden. "I never said it out loud before, but it is true. Everyone I belong to is gone." Lucas set down his carving and looked at her. The expression in his eyes was intense, serious. "You do now, you have me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Theresa's heart began to beat faster, and she set down her mending with trembling hands. "Lucas, I know it has only been 2 weeks," he said, his voice rough. "And I know you came here just for work. But having you here has changed something for me. This cabin has been a tomb for 8 years, a place where I came to hide from the world, but you brought life back into it. You brought light." He stood and crossed to where she sat, kneeling beside her chair so they were at eye level. "I am not good with pretty words, Theresa. I have spent too long alone in the wilderness. But I know what I feel, and I feel something for you that I thought I would never feel again." Theresa's eyes filled with tears. "I feel it too. I have been trying not to, telling myself it was too soon, that I barely know you, but my heart does not seem to care about logic." Lucas reached up and gently wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. The touch sent warmth flooding through her. "I cannot offer you an easy life. The winters here are brutal and the isolation is real, but I can offer you a home and a partner who will stand by you no matter what comes." "That is all I want," Theresa whispered. "A home, someone to belong to." He leaned forward and kissed her, gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard and Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he said. "Not just for 3 weeks. Stay with me, marry me, Theresa, build a life here with me." "Yes," she said, and in that simple word her entire future shifted. "Yes, I will stay." They spent the rest of that rainy day talking, making plans, learning the small details about each other that lovers want to know. Lucas told her about his childhood on a farm in Pennsylvania, about how he had met his first wife at a church social, about the dreams they had shared before cholera stole them all away. Theresa told him about growing up in St. Louis, about her father's work as a clerk and her mother's beautiful singing voice, about her brother's passion for books and learning. "He wanted to be a teacher," she said, her voice catching. "He would have been good at it too. He had so much patience, and he loved helping people understand things." "Tell me more about him," Lucas said. "Tell me about all of them. I want to know where you come from, who shaped you into the woman you are." So she did, and in the telling, her grief became something more bearable, something that could be shared rather than carried alone. When the rain stopped the next morning, they went back to work with renewed energy. The 3 weeks Theresa had agreed to work passed quickly, and soon they had completed all the necessary preparations for winter. The cabin was weatherproof, the firewood was stacked high, and the meat was preserved. "I should take you back to town," Lucas said one evening. "People will be expecting you." "I could write a letter instead," Theresa suggested, "explaining that I am staying. Mrs. Kelly can send my things." "Are you certain, once we are snowed in up here, you will not be able to change your mind until spring?" "I am certain." They rode down to Opal together the next day. The town was buzzing with gossip about their return, and Mrs. Kelly's eyes were wide with questions when Theresa came to collect her belongings. "Well," the older woman demanded, "what happened up there?" "We are getting married," Theresa said simply. "Lucas has asked me to stay with him, and I said yes." Mrs. Kelly's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "But you barely know each other, and winter is coming. Are you certain you want to commit to a life of such isolation?" "I am more certain of this than I have been of anything in a long time." Theresa smiled. "I know it seems sudden, but sometimes you just know when something is right." They were married 3 days later by the young minister, with Mrs. Kelly and the store proprietor standing as witnesses. Theresa wore her best dress, which Mrs. Kelly had carefully pressed for the occasion, and Lucas wore new trousers and a clean shirt he had purchased from the general store. He looked uncomfortable in the formal clothing, but his eyes never left Theresa's face as they exchanged vows. "I promise to cherish you and protect you," Lucas said when it came time for his vows. "To share everything I have and everything I am. To be your partner in all things, for as long as we both draw breath." "I promise to stand by you," Theresa replied, her voice steady and clear. "To make a home with you, to share your joys and your sorrows, to be your family from this day forward." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. The few people who had gathered to witness the unusual wedding applauded, and Mrs. Kelly wiped away tears. They spent their wedding night at the boarding house, in the same small room where Theresa had stayed when she first arrived in Opal. It felt like a lifetime ago rather than just a few weeks. Lucas was patient and gentle, mindful that this was her first time, and Theresa discovered that physical intimacy could be both powerful and tender, a joining of bodies that reflected the joining of their hearts. The next morning, they packed their supplies and began the journey back to the mountain cabin. This time, the ride felt different to Theresa. She was not going to a temporary job but to her home, to begin building a life with her husband. Winter arrived in earnest a week after their return. Snow fell steadily for 3 days, blanketing the valley in white and sealing them in their mountain sanctuary. The world beyond their cabin ceased to exist, and Theresa found that she did not mind. Everything she needed was here: warmth, food, and the man she loved. They fell into new rhythms as husband and wife. Lucas taught her to snowshoe, and they explored the winter landscape together, watching deer dig through the snow for food and following the tracks of foxes. He showed her where he set his trap lines and taught her to skin and cure the pelts they caught. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, and Lucas carved while Theresa sewed or read aloud from the few books he owned. One night, as they lay together in the bed they now shared, Theresa said, "I never imagined my life would turn out like this. 6 months ago, I was living in the city, and my biggest worry was whether I would have time to visit my friend Clara on Thursday." "Are you sorry?" Lucas asked quietly. "No, never." She turned to face him in the darkness. "I lost everything and it nearly destroyed me, but somehow losing everything led me here to you, and I would not trade this for anything." He pulled her close, and she felt the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "I spent 8 years certain that I would never love anyone again. I thought that part of me had died with Sarah and Emma. But you proved me wrong, Theresa. You reminded me that the heart has room for more than one great love in a lifetime." The winter passed in a blur of snow and firelight, of quiet work and quieter companionship. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, the small intimacies that make up a marriage. Lucas discovered that Theresa sang while she worked, old songs her mother had taught her. Theresa learned that Lucas talked to the horses as if they were people, and that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her by surprise. When spring finally arrived, melting the snow and filling the creek with rushing water, they emerged from their winter cocoon to find the world renewed. Wild flowers covered the valley floor, and birds returned to fill the air with song. "We should go to town," Lucas said. "Stock up on supplies and let people know we survived the winter." They made the journey to Opal in early May, and the town received them with surprise and curiosity. Most had assumed Theresa would not last the winter, that she would either flee back to civilization or be defeated by the harsh conditions. "You look well," Mrs. Kelly said, studying Theresa with sharp eyes. "Mountain life agrees with you." It was true. Theresa had changed in the months since her arrival in Opal. Her hands were no longer soft, her skin had been weathered by wind and sun, and her body had grown lean and strong from hard work. But more than the physical changes, there was a confidence in her bearing that had not been there before, a sense of having found her place in the world. They purchased supplies and spent the night at the boarding house, but both were eager to return to the mountains. Town felt too crowded, too noisy after the peaceful isolation of the valley. "I never thought I would prefer the wilderness to civilization," Theresa said as they rode back toward home. "But I do. There is something pure about it, something honest." The mountains do not lie, Lucas agreed. They are what they are, no pretense or deception. I always found that comforting. As spring turned to summer, they worked together to expand their home. Lucas built an addition onto the cabin, creating a separate room that could serve as a bedroom. They planted a larger garden and built a chicken coop, and Lucas taught Theresa to fish in the creek. One evening in late July, as they sat outside watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold, Theresa said, "I think I might be with child." Lucas turned to her, his eyes wide. "Are you certain?" "Fairly certain. I have missed my courses twice now, and I have been feeling strange in the mornings." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "I never thought I would have another child. After Emma died, I could not imagine it. But now I can, and I want it more than anything." "Are you happy?" Theresa asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy does not begin to cover what I feel." He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "You have given me back my life, Theresa. You have made me whole again." They made another trip to town in August so the doctor could confirm what Theresa already knew. She was indeed expecting, and the baby would likely arrive in early February. "You will want to come to town before the snows start," the doctor advised. "Childbirth can be unpredictable, and you will want proper care." But as autumn arrived and the aspen leaves turned gold again, marking a year since Theresa's arrival in Wyoming, they discussed the matter and decided to stay in the mountains. Lucas had helped deliver foals and calves, and Theresa was healthy and strong. They would manage, just as they had managed everything else. They spent the fall preparing for both winter and the baby. Lucas built a cradle from pine wood, carving it with careful attention to every detail. Theresa sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at how small they were. They stockpiled extra supplies and made certain the cabin was as secure and comfortable as possible. The second winter was easier than the first, perhaps because they knew what to expect, or perhaps because the anticipation of the coming child filled them with joy that made the dark months bearable. Theresa's belly grew round, and Lucas treated her with an almost comical level of care, constantly worried that she was doing too much or working too hard. "I am pregnant, not fragile," she would remind him, but secretly she loved his concern. On a snowy February morning, Theresa's labor began. Lucas tried to hide his nervousness as he boiled water and prepared clean cloths, but his hands shook slightly as he helped her through each contraction. "I am scared," Theresa admitted during a brief respite from the pain. "I know, so am I." Lucas took her hand. "But we have faced everything else together, and we will face this too." The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the day and into the night. Lucas stayed by her side every moment, offering water, wiping her brow, encouraging her when she was certain she could not continue. And finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, their son was born. He was small and red and perfect, with a thick shock of dark hair and lungs that proved themselves immediately. Lucas cut the cord with shaking hands and wrapped the baby in a soft blanket before placing him in Theresa's arms. "A boy," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We have a son." Lucas knelt beside the bed, one hand touching the baby's tiny head, the other holding Theresa's hand. "What should we name him?" Theresa thought of her father, who had been a good man, steady and kind. "James, for my father." "James Dalton." "James," Lucas repeated, testing the name. "It suits him." The baby's arrival transformed their lives again. The cabin that had been a home for two now held three, and the sound of an infant's cry echoed off the mountains. Lucas proved to be a devoted father, rising in the night to bring the baby to Theresa for feeding, carrying him in a sling while he worked, singing to him in a rough voice that somehow always calmed the child's fussing. "I was so afraid. Lucas admitted one night as they watched James sleep in his cradle. "After Emma died, I was afraid that if I ever had another child, I would not be able to love them properly, that I would always be comparing them to her or holding back to protect myself from potential loss." "But you do not?" Theresa asked. "No, I love him completely just as I love you. My heart did not replace the love I had for Sarah and Emma. It just grew larger to hold more love." He looked at Theresa with wonder in his eyes. "You taught me that. You taught me that healing is possible, that life can begin again even after terrible loss." As James grew from an infant into a chubby baby who babbled and grabbed at everything within reach, Theresa marveled at the path her life had taken. 2 years ago, she had been a city girl who had never imagined living anywhere but St. Louis. She had never ridden a horse, never skinned a rabbit, never spent a night farther from civilization than her aunt's house in the country. Now she was a mountain woman, as comfortable with a rifle as with a sewing needle, able to read the weather in the clouds and find her way through the forest without getting lost. She had learned to preserve food for the winter, to make soap and candles, to treat minor injuries and illnesses with herbs from the mountains. She had learned that she was stronger than she ever imagined, capable of enduring hardship and thriving in conditions that would have defeated her former self. But more than the practical skills, she had learned what it meant to truly belong to someone and have them belong to her in return. Lucas was her partner in every sense, sharing the work and the decisions, trusting her judgment and respecting her opinions. Their marriage was built on equality and mutual respect, on shared adversity and shared joy. When James was 6 months old, they made the journey to Opal so the townspeople could meet him. The women clucked over him and marveled at how healthy he looked, and Mrs. Kelly held him with tears in her eyes. "I never thought you would last even one winter up there," she said to Theresa. "But look at you now. You are blooming, and so is your family." They stayed in town for 3 days, enjoying the novelty of seeing other people and sleeping in a real bed. But by the 3rd day, both Lucas and Theresa were eager to return home. "I never thought I would be someone who found town overwhelming," Theresa said with a laugh as they prepared to leave. "But all I want now is the quiet of our valley." The years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their growing family. When James was 2, Theresa gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Lucas's first wife. It had been Theresa's idea, a gesture of respect for the woman who had come before her and the child Lucas had lost. "Are you certain?" Lucas had asked when she suggested it. "I do not want you to feel like you are in someone else's shadow." "I am not in anyone's shadow," Theresa assured him. "I am standing in the light in my own life with my own family, but I want to honor what came before. Sarah and Emma were part of your story, and your story is part of mine now." So their daughter was named Sarah, and she grew into a bright, curious child with her mother's brown eyes and her father's stubborn determination. 2 years later, another son arrived, whom they named William after Lucas's father. The cabin expanded again to accommodate the growing family, and the valley rang with the sounds of children's laughter and play. Lucas taught his children the ways of the mountains, just as he had taught Theresa. They learned to track animals, to identify plants, to move quietly through the forest. Theresa taught them to read and write, using the books they purchased on their yearly trips to town and writing lessons on a slate board Lucas had made. It was not always easy. There were winters when food ran short and they had to ration carefully. There was the summer when a wildfire threatened the valley, and they spent terrifying days fighting to save their home. There was the autumn when young Sarah fell from a tree and broke her arm, and they had to splint it and wait anxiously to see if it would heal properly. But through it all, they had each other. Lucas and Theresa faced every challenge as partners, supporting each other through the difficult times and celebrating together during the good times. Their love, which had begun as a fragile thing born from shared loneliness, had grown into something deep and unshakable, a foundation upon which their entire lives were built. One evening, when James was 8 and already showing signs of growing into a tall, strong young man, Theresa sat on the porch watching her children play in the fading light. Lucas came to sit beside her, and they watched together in comfortable silence. "You ever miss it?" Lucas asked after a while. "The city, the ease of having shops and neighbors close by, the life you might have had." Theresa considered the question seriously, as she always did. "Sometimes I wonder what path my life might have taken if my parents had lived. But I do not miss that life, because this is where I belong. This valley, this cabin, this family. You." She leaned her head against his shoulder and he wrapped his arm around her. "When I stepped off that stagecoach 7 years ago, I was lost and alone and terrified. I thought my life was over, that everything good had been taken from me. But really, it was just beginning. I had to lose everything to find what I was always meant to have." "We saved each other," Lucas said quietly. "I was just existing up here, going through the motions of life without really living. You reminded me what it was to hope, to love, to build something that mattered." The children's voices rang out across the valley, calling to each other as they played their games. James had Sarah on his shoulders, and William was trying to climb up to join them, all three of them laughing. The mountains stood eternal around them, and smoke curled from the chimney of their cabin. Everything about the scene spoke of home, of family, of belonging. "You know," Theresa said, "when you told me I had family now, that I had you, I thought it was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever said to me. And it was. But I did not realize then how much more it would come to mean. Now I have you and our children and this life we have built together. I have more family than I ever imagined." Lucas turned and kissed her forehead. "We have been blessed, that is certain. We took our pain and our loss and we built something good from it." As night fell and the first stars appeared above the mountains, they called the children inside. The family gathered around the table for supper, a meal that Theresa and Lucas had prepared together. James chattered about the fox den he had discovered near the creek. Sarah wanted to know when they would next go to town because she needed more paper for drawing. William, at 4 years old, was mostly interested in stealing bites from his siblings' plates when they were not looking. After supper, Lucas played his fiddle, an instrument he had taught himself over the long winter evenings. The music filled the cabin, and Theresa sang along, her voice weaving through the melody. The children danced, William hopping around with more enthusiasm than grace, while James spun Sarah in careful circles. When the children were finally tucked into their beds, tired from the day's activities, Lucas and Theresa stepped outside for a few moments of quiet. The night was clear and cold, and the stars blazed overhead in a way they never did in the city, undiminished by lamp light or smoke. "I have been thinking," Lucas said. "James is getting old enough that I could start teaching him the trap lines this winter. He has been asking, and I think he is ready." "He will love that," Theresa said. "He wants to be just like you. And Sarah wants to be just like you." "I caught her trying to read that book on medicinal plants yesterday, sounding out the words." Lucas smiled. "We have good children, Theresa. They are growing up strong and capable." "They have a good father," Theresa replied, "and they have the mountains to teach them." There is no better education than learning to live in harmony with the wild. They stood together for a while longer, watching the stars and listening to the night sounds of the wilderness around them. An owl called from the forest, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Once, such sounds would have frightened Theresa. Now they were familiar, comforting, even the voices of the world she had made her own. "I love you," Lucas said, not for the first time and not for the last. He said it often, these simple words that carried the weight of everything they meant to each other. "I love you too," Theresa replied, the words as true now as they had been the first time she said them, perhaps even more so for being tested and strengthened by years of shared life. They went inside, banked the fire, and climbed the ladder to the loft where their own bed now resided, the main room below having been given over to the children. As Theresa settled into Lucas's arms, she thought about the journey that had brought her here, the losses and the fears, the courage it had taken to keep moving forward when everything seemed hopeless. If someone had told her, on that terrible day when she buried her family, that happiness awaited her in a mountain valley in Wyoming, she would not have believed them. Loss of that magnitude seemed like it should be permanent, final, a wound that could never heal. But she had learned that the human heart is more resilient than it seems, that it can break and heal and break again and still find the strength to love. That endings can become beginnings if you are brave enough to keep walking through the darkness until you find the light. She had found her light in Lucas, and together they had built a life that honored both their pasts and their future. They had not forgotten the people they had lost. Sarah and Emma and Theresa's parents and brother lived on in memory, in the stories they told their children, in the names they had chosen, in the love that had shaped who they were. But they had also found a way to be happy again, to embrace the present and look forward to the future. They had learned that you can hold grief and joy together in your heart, that honoring the past does not mean you cannot build something new. As Theresa drifted toward sleep, lulled by the warmth of the fire below and the steady breathing of her husband beside her, she felt a profound sense of peace. Her life had not turned out anything like she had planned. It was harder, more isolated, more demanding than anything she could have imagined. It was also fuller, richer, more deeply satisfying than she had ever dreamed possible. She had found her place in the world, her purpose, her home. She had found family not through birth but through choice, through commitment, through the daily work of building a life together. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own challenges and rewards. The children grew taller and more independent. James became skilled at trapping and hunting, often accompanying his father on trips into the high country. Sarah developed a talent for drawing, filling pages with remarkably accurate sketches of the plants and animals around them. William proved to be a natural with horses, able to calm even the most skittish animal with his patient, gentle manner. When James turned 15, Lucas took him on a month-long expedition into the deep wilderness, a sort of rite of passage. Theresa worried the entire time they were gone, though she tried not to show it. When they finally returned, both were leaner and weather-beaten, but James carried himself differently, with a new confidence and maturity. "He did well," Lucas told her that night. "Better than well. He has good instincts and he kept his head in difficult situations. He is ready to start making his own way in the world, though I hope he chooses to stay close." "He will," Theresa said with certainty. "The mountains are in his blood now, just as they are in ours." She was right. James showed no interest in leaving the valley, instead working with his father to expand their operation. They built a second cabin a mile from the first, and James began trapping his own lines and building his own life while remaining close to his family. Sarah, at 13, announced that she wanted to become a teacher. "There are children in Opal who need educating," she said, "and I could live there during the school term and come home in the summers." It was hard to let her go, even part-time, but Lucas and Theresa had always encouraged their children to follow their own paths. So they helped Sarah find lodging with a family in town, and she began assisting the schoolteacher, learning the profession while continuing her own education. William, at 11, was still deciding what he wanted to do, content for now to help his parents and learn all he could about mountain life. One spring morning, when the valley was thick with wildflowers and the creek ran high with snowmelt, Lucas and Theresa took a rare moment to themselves, riding out to a high meadow they had always loved. They were both in their early 40s now, their hair showing threads of gray, their faces lined by years of sun and wind. "You remember the first time I brought you up here?" Lucas asked as they sat on a sun-warmed rock, looking out over the valley below. "I remember being terrified and trying not to show it," Theresa replied with a laugh. "I had no idea what I was getting into, agreeing to come work for you. I had no idea what I was getting into either, hiring a city woman who had probably never worked a day of hard labor in her life." Lucas smiled. "But I knew there was something special about you from the moment you held still when that wolf threatened you. Courage like that is rare." "You gave me reason to be brave," Theresa said. "You gave me something to fight for, something to build toward. When I had nothing left to lose, you showed me I had everything to gain." They sat in silence for a while, comfortable with each other in the way of long married couples who no longer need words to communicate. The sun was warm on their faces, and the breeze carried the scent of pine and earth. "I want to tell you something," Lucas said finally. "Something I have never said properly. When Sarah and Emma died, I thought my capacity for happiness died with them. I thought I would spend the rest of my life just surviving, just getting through one day after another. But you proved me wrong. You showed me that life can surprise you, that joy can find you even in the darkest places. You gave me back my future, Theresa. You gave me back myself." Theresa felt tears prick her eyes. "You did the same for me. When I stepped off that stagecoach with nothing and no one, I felt like I was drowning. But you pulled me out of that dark water. You reminded me that I was still alive and that life was still worth living." Lucas took her hand, his rough, calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "We saved each other." "We did," Theresa agreed. "And then we built something beautiful together." They stayed in the meadow until the sun began to sink toward the mountains, then rode back to the cabin they had shared for so many years. William was there, having made supper in their absence, and they sat together as a family, talking about the day's events and making plans for the coming week. That night, as Theresa prepared for bed, she caught sight of herself in the small mirror Lucas had bought her years ago. The reflection showed a woman who bore little resemblance to the frightened, grieving girl who had arrived in Opal so long ago. This woman had strength in her features, confidence in her bearing, and peace in her eyes. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, the losses that had threatened to destroy her, and the love that had rebuilt her. She thought about the family she had lost and the family she had found. She thought about the girl she had been and the woman she had become. "No regrets?" Lucas asked, coming to stand behind her, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "Not a single one," Theresa said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "Every step of the path, even the painful ones, led me here, led me to you, to our children, to this life. I would not change anything." Lucas kissed the top of her head. "Neither would I." The years rolled on, bringing more changes and challenges. James met a young woman named Elizabeth during a trip to town, and after a proper courtship they married and settled in the cabin he had built. Within a year, they had a son, making Lucas and Theresa grandparents. The joy of holding their first grandchild was profound, a connection to the future that felt like a blessing. Sarah completed her training and became the official school teacher in Opal, respected for her patience and her skill. She married a shopkeeper's son, a kind man who supported her passion for education, and they built a house in town where they raised 3 children of their own. William eventually decided to try his hand at ranching, purchasing land in a neighboring valley where he raised horses and cattle. He married a rancher's daughter, and together they built a successful operation. Through it all, Lucas and Theresa remained in their mountain valley, the heart of a growing family that visited often and stayed connected despite the distances and different paths they had chosen. The cabin had been expanded multiple times over the years, with additions and improvements that reflected the life they had built within its walls. On their 20th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered for a celebration. The cabin was bursting with people, noise, and laughter, and Theresa moved through it all with a full heart, marveling at the family they had created. That evening, after everyone had left or settled down to sleep in various corners of the expanded cabin, Lucas and Theresa stepped outside into the cool night air. The stars blazed overhead, constant and eternal, the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting, their wedding, the birth of their children. 20 years, Lucas said, shaking his head in wonder. It seems like both forever and no time at all. The best 20 years of my life, Theresa said. Thank you for asking me to stay. Thank you for seeing something in me worth saving. You saved yourself, Lucas replied. I just gave you a place to do it. You took your grief and your fear and you turned them into strength. You took a hard life in an isolated place and you made it into a home, a real home, filled with love and warmth. We did it together, Theresa corrected. Everything we have, we built together. They stood together under the stars, holding hands as they had done countless times over the years. The mountains rose around them, ancient and enduring, sheltering the valley that had become their world. Somewhere in the darkness, a wolf howled and another answered, their voices carrying across the wilderness. Theresa was no longer frightened by such sounds. She understood now that the wolves were just living their lives, raising their families, surviving in the same mountains that had become her home. They were part of the same world, all of them interconnected, all of them belonging to this wild and beautiful place. I have been thinking about something, Lucas said. We have lived a good life here, you and I. We have raised strong children, built something that will last beyond us. But I wonder sometimes if we should tell our story, write it down so that future generations will know how we came together. What would we say? Theresa asked. The truth. That we were both broken when we met, both grieving and lost. That we found each other in the wilderness and built a life from scratch. That love can heal even the deepest wounds if you are brave enough to open your heart again. Theresa smiled. That is a good story. A true story. It is our story, Lucas said, and I am grateful for every moment of it, even the hard parts, especially the hard parts because they taught us what we were capable of surviving. They went inside eventually, back to the warmth of the fire and the sound of their grandchildren's breathing as they slept. They climbed to their loft, to the bed they had shared for 2 decades, and held each other in the darkness. I love you, Lucas whispered, the words he had spoken thousands of times and would speak thousands more. I love you, Theresa replied, meaning it as deeply as she had the first time, as deeply as she would the last time, whenever that might be. More years passed, and Lucas and Theresa aged gracefully together, their bond only strengthening with time. They were grandparents many times over now, and the valley often echoed with the voices of visiting children. They had slowed down somewhat, no longer able to work as hard or as long as they once had. But they still rose with the sun and found satisfaction in the daily routines of mountain life. When Lucas turned 55, he took Theresa on a journey to the high country, to a place he had wanted to show her for years, but had never found the right time. It was a difficult climb, taking 2 days to reach, but the destination was worth it. A pristine alpine lake surrounded by towering peaks, its water so clear you could see to the bottom. "I came here once, years ago, before I met you," Lucas said as they stood at the water's edge. "I was thinking about ending my life. I was so tired of hurting, so tired of being alone. But I stood here looking at this water, at these mountains, and something stopped me. I realized that even though I had lost everything, the world was still beautiful. And if the world could still be beautiful, then maybe life was still worth living." Theresa took his hand, understanding the significance of him bringing her here. "I am glad you made that choice. So am I, because it meant I was still alive when you came into my life. It meant I had the chance to love again, to build a family again, to be happy again." He turned to face her. "You were worth waiting for, Theresa, worth every lonely year, every dark night. You were worth everything." They stayed by the lake for a week, camping under the stars and reveling in the solitude and beauty of the high country. It was like a return to their earliest days together, when it had been just the two of them against the wilderness, learning to trust each other and build something from nothing. When they returned to the valley, they found that William had come to visit and had made improvements to the cabin in their absence, repairing some boards and replacing a window that had been cracked. It was a reminder that they were not alone, that the family they had created would continue to care for them as they had cared for their children. "This is what it is all about," Lucas said that evening as they watched the sunset from their porch. "Building something that lasts, creating connections that endure. We have done that, you and I. We have built something good." Theresa leaned against him, feeling the solidity of his presence, the comfort of his nearness. "We have. And it all started with a simple offer: you have me." 3 words that changed everything. 3 words that saved us both, Lucas agreed. As the years continued to pass, Lucas and Theresa became the patriarch and matriarch of a large and growing family. Their children were successful and happy. Their grandchildren were healthy and thriving, and new great-grandchildren were beginning to arrive. The family gathered in the mountain valley each summer for a reunion, and the valley rang with laughter and conversation as multiple generations came together. During one such gathering, when Theresa was 68 and Lucas was 72, their oldest grandson asked them how they had met. The young man was about to be married himself and wanted to hear the story of his grandparents' love. So Lucas and Theresa told the story, taking turns with the details, remembering the fear and loneliness of those early days and the courage it had taken to trust each other. They told about the wolf by the creek, about the 3 weeks of work that had turned into a lifetime, about the moment when Theresa had said she had no family and Lucas had replied that she had him now. "That was the moment," Theresa said, looking at Lucas with eyes still bright with love after all these years. "That was when I knew I was going to be all right. When he offered himself as my family, he gave me something to build my life around. He gave me belonging." "And you gave me purpose," Lucas added. "You reminded me why life was worth living. You brought joy back into my world." The family listened in rapt silence, even the youngest children sensing that they were hearing something important, something true. When the story was finished, there were tears in more than a few eyes. "That is a love story for the ages," their grandson said. "Thank you for sharing it." "It is just our life," Theresa said with a smile. "But I suppose our life has been a love story from that first day to this one." As the sun set over the mountains that evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, Theresa looked around at the family gathered in the valley. 3 generations of descendants from the union she and Lucas had formed in this very place. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all carrying forward the legacy of love and resilience they had built. She thought about the girl she had been, stepping off that stagecoach in Opal with nothing but grief and fear. She thought about the journey she had taken, the trials she had endured, the courage she had found within herself. She thought about the man who had given her a chance, who had seen her worth when she could not see it herself. And she thought about the life they had built together, brick by brick, day by day, through work and love and unwavering commitment to each other. It had not been easy. There had been struggles and sorrows, losses and disappointments. But through it all, they had stood together, two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed to heal and grow and thrive. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, coming to stand beside her as the family talked and laughed behind them. "I am thinking about how grateful I am," Theresa said, "for all of it, for every moment good and bad, for the path that brought me here to you, to this family, to this life." Lucas put his arm around her shoulders and she leaned into him, fitting perfectly against his side as she had done for more than 40 years. "I am grateful too," he said, "for the courage you showed in staying, for the love you gave so freely, for the life we built together." They stood together as the stars began to appear overhead, the first pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. The mountains stood eternal around them, and the valley spread below, filled with the people they loved most in the world. Theresa had long ago stopped mourning what she had lost, though she had never forgotten. Her parents and brother lived in her memory, honored and cherished, but they no longer caused her pain. She had learned that it was possible to hold grief and joy together, to honor the past while embracing the present. She had learned that family was not just about blood, but about choice and commitment and love. That home was not a place you were born, but a place you built with your own hands and heart. That love could heal even the deepest wounds if you were brave enough to trust again. Most of all, she had learned that life could surprise you, that happiness could find you even in your darkest moments, that endings could become beginnings if you had the courage to keep moving forward. She had stepped off that stagecoach so many years ago with nothing, and now she had everything that mattered: love, family, purpose, belonging. She had Lucas, who had kept his promise to be her family, to stand by her through everything life brought their way. And together, they had created something beautiful and enduring, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. As the night settled over the mountain valley and the family slowly made their way inside, Lucas and Theresa remained on the porch a moment longer, savoring the peace and the beauty of the place they called home. "I love you," Lucas said, as he had said countless times before. "I love you too," Theresa replied, the words as true and deep as they had ever been. They went inside together, hand in hand, to join their family by the fire. And as laughter and conversation filled the cabin, as grandchildren ran underfoot and adult children told stories, Theresa felt a profound sense of completion. This was what life was about: connection, love, family, home. This was what she had been searching for without knowing it, what she had found in the most unlikely place with the most unlikely person. She had lost everything, and in losing everything, she had found exactly what she needed. She had come to the mountains broken and alone, and the mountains had given her back to herself, stronger and more whole than she had ever been. And they had given her Lucas, the man who had looked at her grief and loneliness and offered himself as the solution, who had kept his promise every single day since. Years later, when Theresa was 75 and Lucas was 79, they knew their time was growing shorter. Lucas's health had begun to decline, his body finally succumbing to the toll of a hard life in harsh conditions. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for Theresa never wavered. One evening in late autumn, As they sat by the fire with blankets wrapped around their shoulders, Lucas said, "I want you to know something. These years with you have been the greatest gift of my life. You took a man who was half dead inside and brought him back to life. You gave me decades of happiness I never thought I would have again." "You did the same for me," Theresa said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me a home when I had none, a family when I had lost everything. You gave me a reason to keep living when I thought I had none left." "Promise me something," Lucas said. "When I am gone, do not close yourself off the way I did after Sarah died. Stay open to life, stay connected to our family. They need you and you need them." "I promise," Theresa said, though the thought of life without him was almost unbearable. "But you are not going anywhere yet. We still have time." They did have time, though not as much as either would have wished. Lucas made it through one more winter, and when spring arrived, he was still there to see the wildflowers bloom in the valley. But by summer, it was clear that he was fading. Their children gathered, wanting to be near, and the cabin was once again filled with family. On a warm July evening, with his wife holding his hand and his children surrounding him, Lucas Dalton took his last breath. He died peacefully, his face relaxed and content, a man who had lived fully and loved deeply and had no regrets. Theresa grieved, as anyone would grieve the loss of a beloved partner of nearly 50 years. But she did not break. She had learned too much, become too strong to be destroyed by loss, even loss this profound. She carried her grief with dignity, supported by the family she and Lucas had created together. She stayed in the mountain valley, in the cabin they had built and expanded over the years. Her children wanted her to move to town, to be closer to people and amenities, but she refused. "This is my home," she told them firmly. "This is where I belong. This is where Lucas and I built our life, and I am not leaving it." They accepted her decision, and William moved his family back to the valley to be near her, ensuring she would not be truly alone. Theresa continued to live independently, still capable of caring for herself, still finding purpose in the daily rhythms of mountain life. She lived for another 12 years after Lucas's death. Years filled with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with the changing seasons and the enduring beauty of the mountains. She told stories about Lucas to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive, ensuring that future generations would know about the man who had saved her and whom she had saved in return. When Theresa finally passed away at the age of 87, it was peacefully in her sleep, in the bed she had shared with Lucas for so many years. Her children found her in the morning, a slight smile on her face, as if she had been dreaming of something pleasant. They buried her beside Lucas in a spot they had chosen years before, on a rise overlooking the valley with a view of the mountains they had loved so much. The entire family gathered for the funeral, 3 generations coming together to say goodbye to the woman who had been the heart of their family. At the gathering after the funeral, the family sat together and talked about Theresa and Lucas, about the legacy they had left behind. They talked about courage and resilience, about love that could overcome any obstacle, about the importance of family and home and belonging. "They showed us what was possible," James said, now an old man himself. "They showed us that you can lose everything and still build a beautiful life. That love can heal the deepest wounds. That family is worth fighting for." "They gave us all a gift," Sarah added, tears streaming down her weathered face. "They gave us an example of what a real partnership looks like, what real love looks like. They loved each other completely until the very end." The family agreed to keep the cabin in the family, to maintain it as a gathering place where future generations could come and learn about the remarkable couple who had carved out a life in these mountains. They would tell the story of how Theresa and Lucas met, how they saved each other, how they built something lasting and beautiful from pain and loss. And so the story lived on, passed down through the generations, a testament to the power of love and courage and the human capacity for resilience. The story of a woman who had lost everything and a man who had given up on happiness, who found each other in the wilderness and discovered that they were exactly what the other needed. The story of Theresa, who stepped off a stagecoach with nothing, and Lucas, who lived alone in the mountains. The story of how 3 simple words, "You have me," changed 2 lives forever and created a legacy that would endure for generations. In the mountain valley where they had lived and loved and built their home, the seasons continued to change. Snow fell and melted, flowers bloomed and faded, children were born and grew and had children of their own. The mountains stood eternal, witnessing it all, holding the story of 2 remarkable people who had proven that even in the hardest times, even when all seems lost, love can find a way. And in quiet moments, when the wind whispered through the pine trees and the creek sang its endless song, it almost seemed like their spirits were still there, watching over the valley and the family they had created, forever together in the place they had made their own.